The bitter cold of winter had settled over the town of Glen Hollow like a shroud. The wind howling through the Rocky Mountain passes with a mournful wail that seemed to echo the very despair in Clara Hayes' heart. Gray clouds hung heavy in the sky, promising more snow to add to the drifts already piling against the weathered buildings of the small frontier settlement. Clara pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders as rough hands shoved her toward the rickety wagon that held all her worldly possessions. The jeers and catcalls of the townspeople rang in her ears, their faces twisted with righteous anger and cruel satisfaction. Women who had once smiled at her in church now spat at her feet. Men who had tipped their hats when she passed now hurled accusations that cut deeper than the icy wind. "Adulteress!" someone shouted from the crowd. "Shameless woman!" cried another. Clara kept her head high, though tears threatened to freeze on her cheeks. Her husband, Thomas, had been dead barely 3 months, taken by typhoid fever that had swept through the town like wildfire. She had nursed him through those final terrible days, held his hand as he burned with fever, closed his eyes when he finally found peace. And this was her reward, to be cast out based on nothing more than malicious gossip and the word of Thomas's brother, who had always resented her. Judge Morrison stood on the steps of the town hall, his black coat making him look like a carrion bird against the snow. "Clara Hayes," he intoned, his voice carrying over the mob, "you have been found guilty of bringing shame upon this Christian community. You are hereby banished from Glen Hollow, never to return." A stone struck her shoulder. Then another glanced off the wagon wheel. The crowd was growing bolder, their bloodlust rising. Even Reverend Phillips, who had spoken words of comfort at Thomas's graveside, now turned his back on her plea for sanctuary. "Please," Clara called out, her voice barely audible above the wind. "I've done nothing wrong. I loved my husband. I was faithful." "Liar!" The word came from Martha Henderson, whose husband owned the general store. "We all saw you speaking with that traveling merchant, smiling at him like a common trollop while your husband lay dying." Clara remembered the incident. She had been purchasing medicine for Thomas, desperately trying anything that might ease his suffering. The merchant had been kind, had offered a small discount when he saw her distress. That simple human kindness was now twisted into evidence of her supposed sins. The crowd pressed closer, and Clara climbed onto the wagon seat with trembling hands. The old mare hitched to it snorted nervously, sensing the violence in the air. As Clara took up the reins, mud and stones pelted the wagon's canvas cover. Someone had slashed it during the night, and snow was already beginning to drift through the tears. "Get on with you," Sheriff Watson bellowed, firing his pistol into the air. "And don't let us see your face in these parts again, or it'll be the whipping post for you." Clara slapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward through the rutted street. The mob followed for a way, their shouts and threats pursuing her past the last buildings of Glen Hollow and out onto the narrow mountain road. Only when the town disappeared behind a bend did they finally turn back, leaving her alone with the howling wind and the crushing weight of her exile. The road quickly became treacherous as fresh snow began to fall, obscuring the path and making every turn dangerous. Clara had no clear destination. She had mentioned to the judge that she had cousins in Denver, but that was a lie born of desperation. She had no one. Thomas had been her only family since her parents died of influenza 5 years ago. As darkness began to fall, the temperature plummeted further. The mare struggled through deepening drifts, its breath coming in great clouds of steam. Clara's fingers were numb on the reins, and she could no longer feel her feet. She knew she needed to find shelter soon or perish in the storm that was rapidly approaching. The wagon wheel caught on a hidden rock beneath the snow, lurching violently and throwing Clara from her seat. She landed hard in a drift. The breath knocked from her lungs. The mare, freed from her grip on the reins, continued forward a few paces before stopping, confused and cold. Clara struggled to her feet, her ankle throbbing where she had twisted it in the fall. She limped to the wagon and managed to lead the mare to a small grove of pines that offered minimal protection from the wind. Her hands shook so badly she could barely unhitch the animal and tie it to a tree. Inside the damaged wagon, she found her few blankets already damp from the snow that had blown through the slashed canvas. The small store of food she had managed to gather was pitifully inadequate. Some hardtack, dried beans, a small sack of flour, no matches for a fire, no axe to cut wood even if she could build one. As night fell completely, Clara huddled in the wagon, wrapped in her damp blankets, listening to the storm rage outside. The wind made the damaged canvas snap and crack like gunshots. She tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. God seemed as distant and cold as the stars hidden behind the storm clouds. By midnight, Clara could no longer stop shivering. Her thoughts became sluggish, and she knew with a strange detachment that she was freezing to death. Part of her welcomed it. What did she have to live for now? Her reputation destroyed, her home stolen, cast out to die like an animal in the wilderness. She must have dozed, or perhaps begun to slip into that final sleep, because she didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until a horse snorted just outside the wagon. Terror shot through her exhausted body. Had the townspeople followed her after all? Had they decided exile wasn't enough punishment? A figure appeared at the wagon's opening, tall and broad-shouldered, covered in snow. Clara tried to scream, but could only manage a weak whimper. The figure climbed into the wagon, and, in the darkness, she could just make out the silhouette of a man in a heavy coat and wide-brimmed hat. "Lord Almighty," a deep voice muttered. "What in the hell? Pardon me, ma'am. What are you doing out here?" Clara tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too hard to form words. The man leaned closer, and she could smell wood smoke and leather, the scent of someone who lived outdoors. "You're near frozen," he said, his voice urgent now. He touched her face with a gloved hand, then cursed under his breath. "Can you hear me? We need to get you somewhere warm." Clara managed the slightest nod. The man didn't hesitate. He gathered her up in arms that seemed impossibly strong, blankets and all, and carried her from the wagon. She was placed on a horse, the man mounting behind her and holding her against his chest. His coat was opened and pulled around them both, sharing what warmth he had. "Your things," Clara whispered. "Leave 'em for now," he said. "Getting you warm is what matters. I'll come back for the wagon if the storm breaks." They rode through the blinding snow, the man guiding his horse with the sure knowledge of someone who knew every tree and stone of the mountain paths. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the steady heartbeat against her ear and the strong arms keeping her from falling. After what seemed like hours, but was probably less than one, they stopped. Clara forced her eyes open to see a small log cabin nestled against a cliff face, its windows glowing with the warm light of a fire. The man dismounted and carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them. The warmth hit her like a physical blow, making her gasp. He set her down in a chair near the stone fireplace, then quickly added more wood to build up the flames. Clara watched through blurred vision as he moved efficiently around the small space, heating water in a kettle, finding extra blankets from a chest. "Need to get you out of these wet things," he said, then caught himself. "I mean, you need to. I'll step outside while you—" "Can't," Clara whispered. "Hands won't work." The man hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. In the firelight, she could see him better now, a weathered face that might have been handsome once, before sun and wind and something else, something harder, had left their marks. Dark hair shot through with premature gray, eyes the color of winter sky. "I'll be respectful, ma'am," he said finally, "but you'll die if we don't get you warm." With infinite care and his eyes averted as much as possible, he helped her out of her frozen outer garments. Clara was too exhausted and cold to feel embarrassment. He wrapped her in dry blankets and positioned her closer to the fire, then brought her a cup of something hot. "Just broth," he said. "Sip it slow." The warmth spread through her chest, bringing feeling back to her extremities in painful waves. She bit back a cry as circulation returned to her fingers and toes. "Hurts, I know," the man said. "But that's good. Means no frostbite." "Who are you?" Clara managed to ask. "Name's Eli," he said. "Eli Dawson. and you're welcome to stay until the storm passes." He paused, studying her face in the firelight. "What's a woman doing alone on the mountain in weather like this?" Clara looked away, unable to meet his eyes. I was traveling to family in Denver." It was clear he didn't believe her, but he didn't press. Instead, he busied himself making a pallet of furs near the fire. "You sleep there tonight," he said. "I'll take the chair." "I couldn't." "You could and you will," he said firmly. "I've slept in worse places than a chair by my own fire." Clara wanted to protest more, but exhaustion was pulling her under like a dark tide. The last thing she remembered was Eli Dawson placing another log on the fire and settling into the chair with his rifle across his knees, keeping watch through the night while the storm raged outside the small sanctuary of his cabin. Clara woke to the sound of wood being split outside the cabin. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings and the blessed warmth that enveloped her. Memory returned slowly. The exile from Glen Hollow, the terrible cold, the man who had saved her from certain death in the storm. She sat up carefully, noting that someone had placed additional blankets over her during the night. The cabin was small but well built, with careful chinking between the logs to keep out the wind. A coffee pot sat warming on the hearth, and the smell made her stomach remind her how long it had been since she'd eaten a proper meal. The door opened, bringing a swirl of snow and cold air. Eli Dawson entered, his arms full of split wood. He noticed she was awake and gave a brief nod. "Morning," he said simply, stacking the wood by the fireplace. "Storm's still blowing. Looks like it might last another day or two." "I'm sorry to impose," Clara began, but he cut her off with a gesture. "No imposition. Coffee's hot if you want some." He poured her a cup without waiting for an answer, then busied himself at the small cook stove in the corner. Clara watched him work, noting the economy of his movements, the way he seemed to occupy the space without filling it. Everything about him spoke of a man accustomed to solitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving my life." Eli glanced at her, then back to the pan where he was frying salt pork. Any decent man would have done the same. They ate breakfast in near silence, fried pork, biscuits, and beans. Clara tried not to wolf down the food, but hunger won over manners. Eli didn't comment, just pushed more biscuits in her direction. After the meal, Clara insisted on helping with the dishes, though Eli protested. As she worked, she became aware of him watching her, not in an unseemly way, but with a kind of careful assessment. "That's not a traveling dress you are wearing," he said finally. "And no woman travels alone in winter unless she's running from something or to something. Which is it?" Clara's hand stilled in the wash water. She could lie again, but what was the point? This man had saved her life. She owed him at least some measure of truth. "From," she whispered. "Running from," Eli nodded as if he'd expected that answer. "Husband? Dead. 3 months past." "Then what?" He stopped himself. "None of my business. You don't need to explain." But suddenly Clara found she wanted to. The words came pouring out. Thomas's death, the false accusations, the exile. She told it all without tears, her voice flat and matter-of-fact, as if relating something that had happened to someone else. When she finished, Eli was quiet for a long moment. "People can be cruel when they're afraid," he said finally. "And nothing scares them more than a woman alone who doesn't need them." It was such an unexpected response that Clara looked at him in surprise. He was adding wood to the fire. His face turned away. "I should check on your horse and wagon," he said. "See what can be salvaged. In this storm, I've been through worse." He pulled on his heavy coat and gloves. "Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me." The hours passed slowly while he was gone. Clara tidied the already neat cabin, examined the few books on a shelf, a Bible, some almanacs, a worn copy of Shakespeare's tragedies. There were no photographs, no mementos that might hint at Eli Dawson's past. The only decoration was a piece of carved wood hanging on the wall. a delicate rendering of a bird in flight that seemed at odds with the stark functionality of everything else. She was beginning to worry when she heard the horse outside. Eli entered, covered in snow, dragging her trunk. "Mare's in my lean-to with my horses," he said. "Wagon's still there, but it'll need repair come spring. This was all I could carry." Clara opened the trunk, relieved to find her few precious possessions intact: her mother's Bible, a small sewing kit, the daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. At the bottom, wrapped in cloth, was the delicate lace shawl she'd worn at her own wedding. She touched it briefly, then closed the trunk. Over the next days, they developed a careful routine. Eli would tend to the animals and his trap lines while Clara kept the cabin, mending his clothes with her salvaged sewing kit and preparing simple meals from his stores. They spoke little, but the silence was not uncomfortable. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Once, when she was heating water for washing, her sleeve pulled back, revealing fading bruises on her arm from where the townspeople had grabbed her. Eli's face darkened, but he said nothing. On the fourth day, Clara woke to find sunshine streaming through the cabin window. The storm had finally passed. Eli was already outside, and she could hear him on the roof, clearing snow. She ventured out for the first time since her rescue, gasping at the pristine beauty of the mountain valley. The cabin sat in a protected hollow, surrounded by towering pines and aspens. A frozen creek ran nearby, and in the distance, she could see higher peaks reaching toward the crystal sky. "It's beautiful," she said when Eli climbed down from the roof. "Gets lonesome," he replied. "Nearest neighbor is 15 miles. Town's a 2-day ride." "How long have you lived here?" 8 years, give or take." She waited, but he offered nothing more. They stood together in the bright snow, their breath making clouds in the cold air. "I should move on," Clara said finally. "The weather's clear. I've imposed enough. Where would you go?" She had no answer to that. Denver had been a lie. She had no family, no friends who would take her in, no money to start fresh somewhere else. "Stay until you figure it out," Eli said. "Another mouth to feed won't break me, and—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "It's been a long time since I've had someone to talk to, even if we don't talk much." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I can work, cook, clean, mend. I won't be a burden." "You're not a burden," he said roughly, then turned and strode toward the barn before she could respond. That night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Clara worked on patching one of his shirts while Eli cleaned his rifle. The domesticity of it struck her, how quickly they had fallen into these patterns, like an old married couple who had learned to move around each other without collision. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Eli looked up from his work. "Might not answer, but you can ask." "The carving on the wall. Did you make it?" His hand stilled. "Yes. It's beautiful. The detail on the wings. My sister liked birds," he said quietly. "Used to watch them for hours. Said if she could be anything, she'd be a meadowlark, singing in the morning sun." The past tense hung heavy in the air. Clara waited, not pushing. She was 12 when the Comanche raiding party came. Eli continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was out hunting. Came back to find them all gone. Parents, sister, younger brother, cabin burned." "Oh, Eli." Clara set aside her sewing, but didn't move toward him. Instinctively, she knew he wouldn't want comfort, not for a wound that old and deep. "Tracked them for weeks," he went on. "Never found them. Finally gave up. Came here, built this place. Been here ever since." "I'm so sorry." He shrugged, a gesture that tried and failed to be casual. "Long time ago now, but sometimes I still hear her laughing, see her running through the grass with her hair flying behind her like wings." They sat in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence, one that held shared pain and understanding. When Clara finally rose to prepare for bed, she paused by his chair. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. Eli looked up at her, and for just a moment, she saw past the walls he'd built around himself to the man he might have been before loss carved those lines around his eyes. gets easier to bear when it's not carried alone," he said. That night, Clara lay on her pallet by the fire thinking about second chances and the strange paths that lead broken people to each other. Outside, an owl called in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled at the rising moon. But inside the cabin was warmth and safety and the quiet breathing of a man who understood what it meant to lose everything and still find a way to continue living. She thought of the townspeople who had cast her out, of the life she'd lost, and found that the sharp edge of that pain had dulled slightly. Perhaps Eli was right. Perhaps some burdens did get easier when they weren't carried alone. As sleep finally took her, Clara made a decision. She would stay until spring, would help this quiet, wounded man who had saved her life. And perhaps, in helping him, she might find a way to save herself as well. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In his chair, Eli dozed fitfully, as he did every night, ready to wake at the slightest sound. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, he was not keeping watch alone. Tonight, there was someone else in his sanctuary. Someone who might understand that sometimes the only way forward is to stop running from the past and learn to live with its ghosts instead. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering the tracks that led to the cabin and hiding them from anyone who might come looking. Inside, two damaged souls found a moment's peace in each other's company, not yet knowing that their greatest trials and their greatest joys still lay ahead. The weeks passed in a rhythm dictated by winter's grip on the mountain. Each morning, Eli would rise before dawn to tend the horses and check his trap lines, while Clara kept the fire burning and prepared breakfast. They had developed an unspoken choreography, moving around each other in the small space with practiced ease. One crisp morning in late February, Eli suggested Clara accompany him to gather firewood from a fallen pine he'd spotted up the ridge. "Fresh air might do you good," he said, though his tone suggested he might welcome the company as well. Clara bundled herself in one of his old coats, the sleeves rolled up several times, and followed him out into a world transformed by fresh snow. The sun sparkled on the pristine surface like scattered diamonds, and the air was so clear it almost hurt to breathe. They walked in comfortable silence through the forest, Eli pointing out animal tracks, deer, rabbit, the delicate prints of a fox. At one point, he held up a hand, and they stood perfectly still as a doe picked her way through the trees not 20 feet away. "Beautiful," Clara breathed when the deer had passed. "They know this is safe territory." Eli said, "Don't hunt this close to the cabin unless I'm desperate." They reached the fallen pine, and Eli set to work with his saw while Clara gathered smaller branches for kindling. The physical labor felt good after weeks of confinement, and she found herself humming softly as she worked, an old hymn her mother used to sing. She didn't realize Eli had stopped sawing until she turned to find him watching her, an odd expression on his face. "What is it?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing. Just been a long time since I heard anyone sing." He turned back to his work, but she caught the ghost of a smile on his lips as they prepared to head back, arms full of wood. The sun broke through the clouds in a spectacular display. The entire valley below them was illuminated, a bowl of gold and white that seemed to go on forever. "Oh," Clara gasped, setting down her load to take in the view. Eli came to stand beside her. "Never gets old," he said quietly. "Some mornings I come up here just to watch the sun rise. Makes a man feel small, but in a good way, like maybe his troubles aren't as big as he thought." Clara looked at him, seeing the way the light caught the silver in his hair, the deep lines around his eyes that crinkled when he squinted against the brightness. "It's like a cathedral," she said, "like God's own church. Maybe that's why I stay." Eli mused. "Couldn't find much peace in town churches after everything, but maybe here I can still feel something holy." They stood together for a long moment, watching the light play across the snow-covered peaks. Then Clara surprised herself by laughing, a real laugh, the first since Thomas had died. "What's funny?" Eli asked, but he was almost smiling too. "I was just thinking," Clara said. That 6 weeks ago I was certain my life was over, and now here I am, standing on a mountain with a man I barely know, feeling more at peace than I have in years. The Lord does work in mysterious ways. That he does, Eli agreed. He bent to pick up his load of wood, then paused. Clara, I'm glad you're here. Want you to know that... The simple admission seemed to cost him greatly, and Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with exertion or sunlight. I'm glad too, Eli. They made their way back to the cabin, but something had shifted between them, subtle as the changing angle of winter light. That evening, as Clara prepared their usual simple supper, she found herself humming again. Eli sat by the fire working on a piece of harness that needed mending, but she could feel him listening. When she turned with their plates, she caught him watching her with an expression of such raw longing that it took her breath away. The moment their eyes met, he looked down, focusing intently on the leather in his hands. Clara set his plate beside him, her hand accidentally brushing his shoulder. He flinched as if burned, and she quickly withdrew. Sorry, they both said at the same time, then fell into awkward silence. After supper, Clara took up her sewing while Eli returned to his harness repair. The silence stretched between them, no longer comfortable but charged with something unnamed. That song you were humming earlier, Eli said suddenly. My mother used to sing it, Sweet Hour of Prayer. Wasn't it? Yes, Clara said, surprised. My mother loved it too. Would you sing it, if you don't mind? That is... Clara set down her sewing. It had been so long since anyone had asked her to sing. Thomas had never cared for music, said it was frivolous, but looking at Eli's carefully neutral face, she sensed this request had cost him something to make. She began softly, her voice uncertain at first, but growing stronger as the familiar words came back to her. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, that calls me from a world of care. As she sang, she watched Eli's face transform. The harsh lines softened, and his eyes grew distant, as if seeing past the cabin walls to some cherished memory. When she finished, he was quiet for so long she wondered if she'd overstepped somehow. Thank you, he said finally, his voice rough. Sarah, my sister, she had a voice like a bird. Used to sing all the time. I'd forgotten how much I missed it. I could sing more, sometimes, if you'd like. I'd like that very much. That night, Clara lay wakeful on her pallet, acutely aware of Eli's presence across the room. She could hear his breathing, not quite asleep but not fully awake either. The cabin felt smaller somehow, the air heavier with things unsaid. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks, and Clara gasped at the sudden noise. She heard Eli stir in his chair. Can't sleep? He asked quietly. No, you? Not much of a sleeper even in the best of times. He was quiet for a moment. Bad dreams? Clara considered lying, then decided against it. Sometimes I dream I'm back in Glen Hollow, and there... She trailed off, unable to voice the nightmares that still plagued her. She heard him rise from his chair and move closer, though he stopped several feet away. You're safe here, Clara. I want you to know that nobody's going to hurt you while you're under my roof. I know, she whispered. And she did know. Whatever else Eli Dawson was, she knew instinctively that he was a man of his word. It's just hard sometimes to let go of the fear. Fear's not always a bad thing, Eli said. Keeps us alive, but it can also keep us from living. Took me years to learn the difference. And have you? Learned the difference? She could almost hear him thinking in the darkness. Some days I think so. Other days... He paused. Other days I realize I've been so focused on surviving that I forgot there might be something worth surviving for. The words hung between them in the firelit darkness, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Clara pulled her blanket higher, though she wasn't cold. Eli? Would you sit closer to the fire? That chair must be terribly uncomfortable night after night. She heard his sharp intake of breath. I'm fine where I am. Please, I'd feel better if you were more comfortable. Slowly, reluctantly, she heard him move his chair closer to the hearth, though still maintaining a careful distance from her pallet. They lay there in the semi-darkness, both pretending to sleep, both acutely aware of the other's presence. It was Clara who finally broke the silence again. "My husband was a good man," she said softly. "But we never had what my parents had. There was duty and respect, but not warmth. I used to watch other couples in town, see how they looked at each other, and wonder what that felt like." "Dangerous thinking," Eli murmured. "That kind of wondering." "Yes," Clara agreed. "I suppose it is." They said no more that night, but something fundamental had shifted. The careful walls they'd both constructed were beginning to show cracks, letting in slivers of light that illuminated possibilities neither had dared consider. The next morning brought a late winter storm that rattled the windows and piled snow against the door. Eli fought his way to the barn to tend the animals while Clara kept the fire blazing. When he returned, half frozen and covered in snow, she had hot coffee waiting and a warm blanket ready. "Going to be a bad one," he said through chattering teeth. "Might be stuck inside for a day or two." As she helped him out of his frozen coat, her hands brushed against his chest, feeling the cold that had seeped through layers of clothing. Without thinking, she pressed her warm palms against him, trying to share her heat. They both froze at the contact. Clara looked up to find Eli staring down at her, his eyes dark with something that made her pulse race. For a heartbeat, they stood suspended, the storm howling outside, the fire crackling beside them, and the space between them charged with possibility. Then Eli stepped back, gently but firmly. "Thank you," he said formally. I'll get changed into dry clothes." Clara nodded, her cheeks burning as she turned away. But as she busied herself at the stove, she could still feel the solid warmth of him under her palms, could still see the flash of naked longing in his eyes before he'd shuddered it away. The storm raged for 2 days, trapping them in an intimacy that was both torment and sweetness. They talked more during those long hours than they had in all the weeks previous, sharing stories of childhood, books they'd read, dreams they'd once harbored. Clara learned that Eli had wanted to be a schoolteacher before life led him to the mountains. He discovered that she had a gift for numbers and had helped her father with his shop's accounts before he died. On the second night of the storm, as they sat close to the fire for warmth, Clara found herself studying Eli's hands as he whittled a small piece of wood. They were strong hands, scarred from years of hard work, but gentle in their movements. "What are you making?" she asked. "Not sure yet," he admitted. "Sometimes the wood tells me what it wants to be." "Like people, perhaps," Clara said. "Sometimes we don't know what we're meant to be until life shapes us." Eli looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara felt as if he could see straight through to her soul. "And what has life shaped you to be?" "Clara Hayes." The question hung in the air between them. Clara thought of all she had been: dutiful daughter, faithful wife, cast-out widow. But sitting here in this cabin with this man who had saved her in more ways than one, she realized she didn't yet know what she was becoming. "I'm still finding out," she said finally. Eli nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Maybe we both are." The storm blew itself out that night, leaving behind a world transformed once again by snow. But inside the cabin, another kind of transformation was taking place. 2 wounded souls slowly, carefully, beginning to open to the possibility that they might be more than just survivors. They might, perhaps, find a way to truly live again. The first hints of spring came slowly to the mountain, a softening in the air, the sound of water running beneath the ice, the return of birdsong in the early mornings. Clara and Eli worked side by side preparing the small vegetable garden, their hands dark with soil, their conversation easy and companionable. "Tomatoes here," Clara suggested, marking out rows with string, "and beans along the fence where they can climb." "You know your gardens," Eli observed, following her lead. My mother had the finest garden in 3 counties, Clara said with pride. She taught me that plants, like people, flourish when they're given proper care and attention. As she spoke, she looked up to find Eli watching her with that intensity that had become more frequent in recent weeks. Their eyes held for a moment before he turned back to his work, but Clara felt the familiar flutter in her chest that his presence increasingly provoked. They were returning from town with supplies when they encountered the mail carrier on the mountain road. The man, weathered and dusty from the trail, recognized Clara despite the months that had passed. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, tipping his hat but with obvious discomfort. "Got a letter here from Glen Hollow. Addressed to you. Care of general delivery." Clara's blood ran cold as she took the envelope with trembling fingers. She recognized the official seal of the town council. Eli moved his horse closer to hers, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the mail carrier. "Everything all right, ma'am?" the carrier asked, his eyes darting between them. "Fine," Eli answered for her, his tone carrying a clear dismissal. "We'll be on our way." They rode in silence back to the cabin. Once inside, Clara stood holding the letter as if it might burst into flames. Eli took it gently from her hands. "Want me to read it?" he asked. She nodded, sinking into a chair. Eli broke the seal and scanned the contents, his face darkening with each line. "They're saying you've taken up with a man of questionable character in the mountains," he read, his voice tight with controlled anger. "That such behavior confirms their decision to exile you. They're threatening to involve the territorial marshal if you don't cease your immoral conduct." "How did they even know where?" Clara began, then remembered the mail carrier's knowing look. "Of course, news travels." Eli crumpled the letter and threw it into the fire. "Let them come," he said flatly. "This is my land. They have no authority here." "But if they bring the law?" "What law?" Eli turned to face her, his eyes blazing. "The law that cast out an innocent woman based on lies? The law that would see you starve rather than admit they were wrong?" He took a breath, visibly trying to calm himself. "You've done nothing wrong. Clara, nothing. I'm living with a man who isn't my husband," Clara said quietly. "In their eyes, in their eyes, you were guilty the moment Thomas died." Eli interrupted. "Would they prefer you'd frozen to death in that storm? Would that have satisfied their Christian charity?" Clara felt tears threatening. The fear she'd been holding at bay for months came rushing back. "I should leave. I've brought you nothing but trouble." "No." Eli crossed to her in 2 strides, kneeling before her chair and taking her hands in his. It was the first time he'd voluntarily touched her since that day in the storm, and the contact sent electricity through them both. "You've brought life back to this place. To me, I won't let them drive you away." "Eli." Clara's voice broke on his name. "I mean it," he said fiercely. "This is your home now, for as long as you want it." They were so close she could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath. The space between them hummed with tension, slowly, as if drawn by invisible threads. They leaned toward each other. The kiss, when it came, was like a match to dry kindling. Months of careful distance, of denied longing, of midnight awareness, all of it ignited in that moment. Clara's hands came up to frame Eli's face, feeling the roughness of his beard, the warmth of his skin. He made a sound deep in his throat and pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Eli rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "Clara," he whispered, I shouldn't have." "Why?" she asked softly. "Because of what they'll say? They've already said it. Because you deserve better than a broken-down mountain hermit with more ghosts than good sense." Clara pulled back to look at him. "And what do you think I am? A respectable widow?" She laughed, but it had a bitter edge. "That woman is gone. Eli, she died in the snow the night you found me. I don't know who I am now, but I know I'm tired of being afraid, tired of apologizing for wanting to live." Eli studied her face as if memorizing every line. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," he said finally, "and the most beautiful." This time, when they kissed, it was Clara who initiated it. Rising from her chair to meet him, there was hunger in it now, a desperate need that had been building through all those long winter nights. Eli's arms came around her, crushing her against him as if he could merge their bodies through sheer will. "Clara," he gasped against her mouth. "Tell me to stop. Tell me to walk away." "No," she breathed. "I won't. I can't." He groaned and captured her mouth again, backing her against the wall. Clara's hands clutched at his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him, the barely controlled power. This was nothing like the dutiful intimacies of her marriage. This was fire and need, and a wanting so fierce it almost frightened her. It was Eli who finally found the strength to pull away, though he kept her caged against the wall with his arms. Both were panting, disheveled, wild-eyed. "Not like this," he managed. "Not because you're scared and angry. I want it to be right." Clara wanted to protest, her body aching with unfulfilled desire. But she saw the wisdom in his words. This thing between them was too important to rush, too precious to risk on a moment's passion. "You're right," she said softly, though it cost her to admit it. "But Eli, I'm not going anywhere. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." He nodded, pressing a gentler kiss to her forehead before stepping back. "Together," he agreed. That night, they maintained their usual sleeping arrangements, but the cabin fairly crackled with awareness. Every breath, every shift of position, every sigh carried across the space between them like a physical touch. Clara lay awake, her body still humming from their kisses, her mind racing with possibilities both thrilling and terrifying. In his chair, Eli was equally restless. He'd lived alone for so long, had convinced himself he preferred it that way. But now Clara had awakened things in him he'd thought dead forever. Hope, desire, the dangerous dream of a future that included more than mere survival. The next days passed in a haze of heightened awareness. They worked together as always, but now there were stolen glances, brief touches that lingered, moments when they stood too close and forgot what they were doing. The simple domestic routines they'd established took on new meaning. Clara mending his shirts became an act of intimacy. Eli chopping wood became a display of strength she couldn't help but admire. 3 days after the letter, Eli made an announcement over breakfast. "I'm going to town tomorrow. Need to file some paperwork at the land office." "Oh." Clara tried to keep her voice casual, though the thought of him leaving even for a day filled her with unease. "What kind of paperwork?" "Been thinking about expanding the homestead claim," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Making things more official." "I see." Clara wasn't sure what he meant, but something in his manner told her not to press. He returned late the next evening, dusty and tired but with a peculiar energy about him. Clara had spent the day in an agony of worry, imagining all sorts of disasters, and nearly wept with relief when she heard his horse. "Everything all right?" she asked as he entered. "Fine," he said, but there was something different about him, a kind of determined set to his jaw. "Clara, I need to ask you something." She set down the pot she'd been stirring, her heart suddenly racing. "What is it?" Eli took a deep breath, then crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "I've been doing this all wrong," he said, "trying to protect you by keeping distance between us. But that's not protection, it's cowardice. The truth is, I've been falling in love with you since the day I carried you out of that snowstorm." Clara's breath caught. "Eli, let me finish," he said. "I went to town today to see Judge Morrison." Not the one from Glen Hollow, the territorial judge. Told him the whole story. About you, about the exile, about us. He says there's no legal standing to their threats. You're a free woman, Clara, free to make your own choices. "And what choices would those be?" Clara asked, though her heart was already singing the answer. Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. The choice to marry a rough mountain man who can't promise you much beyond hard work and simple living, but who swears to love and protect you for whatever years God grants us. Clara stared at the ring, tears blurring her vision. You're proposing? I'm proposing, he confirmed. I know it's not conventional. I know you might need more time. Yes, Clara interrupted. To think about it, and I understand if... He stopped. What? Yes, she repeated, laughing through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you, Eli Dawson. Yes to all of it. The hard work, the simple living, the mountains, the isolation. Yes to you. His face transformed with joy, years seeming to fall away as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large. He'd had to guess the size, but Clara clutched her hand closed to keep it secure. When? She asked. Judge Morrison can perform the ceremony. Said he'd ride up here whenever we're ready. Could be as soon as next week if... Clara silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her answer into the touch of her lips on his. This time, there was no hesitation, no pulling back. When they finally separated, both were smiling like fools. Next week, she agreed. Though I warn you, I have nothing fine to wear. You could wear feed sacks and still be the most beautiful bride Wyoming's ever seen, Eli said, then blushed at his own words. Clara laughed, a free and joyous sound that filled the cabin. I do believe you're a romantic. Mr. Dawson. You bring it out in me, future Mrs. Dawson, he replied, pulling her close again. They stood together in their simple cabin, holding each other as the sun set behind the mountains. Outside, spring was fully taking hold, melting the last of the winter snow and bringing new life to the world. Inside, two hearts that had known too much sorrow were discovering that joy was still possible, that love could bloom even in the rockiest soil, and that sometimes the greatest gift was simply finding someone who made you want to try again. The ring caught the lamplight as Clara moved to prepare their evening meal, a simple band that represented so much hope, promise, and the choice to build a life together despite all the forces that would try to tear them apart. Whatever came next, they would face it as one. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright, with wildflowers beginning to dot the meadow around the cabin. Clara stood before the small mirror Eli had purchased in town, pinning up her hair with trembling fingers. She wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes, and her mother's lace shawl around her shoulders. You look perfect, Eli said from the doorway. He was dressed in his finest clothes, his face freshly shaved, his usually unruly hair slicked back. Clara had never seen him look so handsome, or so nervous. So do you, she replied, crossing to straighten his collar. Are you ready for this? I've been ready since the day you walked into my life, he said simply. The question is, are you? It's not too late to change your mind. Clara placed her hand over his heart, feeling its rapid beat. I've never been more certain of anything. Eli Dawson, now stop trying to talk me out of marrying you. Judge Morrison arrived just before noon, accompanied by his wife, a cheerful woman named Ruth who immediately took charge of arranging wildflowers and fussing over Clara's appearance. They'd also brought witnesses, the owner of the general store and his wife, good people who'd known Eli for years and showed no judgment about Clara's past. The ceremony was simple, held in the meadow with the mountains as their cathedral, as Judge Morrison spoke the familiar words. Clara found herself thinking of her first wedding, the crowded church, the elaborate dress, the sense of duty rather than joy. This felt different in every way. When Eli took her hands and spoke his vows, his voice rough with emotion, she knew with bone-deep certainty that this was the marriage she was meant to have. I, Eli, take you, Clara, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, and stand by you through whatever trials may come. I offer you not riches or ease, but my whole heart, my strong arms, and my solemn word that you'll never face another storm alone. Clara had to blink back tears as she spoke her own vows. I, Clara, take you, Eli, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, to stand beside you, to bring light to your darkness as you've brought light to mine. I offer you my trust, my devotion, and my promise that wherever life leads us, we'll walk the path together." When Judge Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, Eli kissed her with a tenderness that made the witnesses smile. Ruth Morrison wiped her eyes, declaring it the sweetest wedding she'd ever attended. They shared a simple meal together. Then the guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Clara and Eli stood together on the porch, watching the sky turn gold and pink. "No regrets?" Eli asked softly. "None," Clara assured him. "Though I do wonder what happens now." Eli turned her to face him, his eyes dark with promise. "Now, Mrs. Dawson, I carry you over the threshold like a proper bridegroom, and then—" He let the sentence trail off, but his meaning was clear. Clara felt heat bloom in her cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "Then, Mr. Dawson, we begin our life together, truly together." He swept her up in his arms, carrying her into the cabin with ease, but once inside, with the door closed behind them, a sudden shyness seemed to overtake them both. They stood facing each other in the familiar space that now seemed charged with new meaning. "Clara," Eli began, then stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "I want you to know. I understand if you need time. We don't have to—" She silenced him by stepping close and placing her hands on his chest. "Eli, I've spent my whole life doing what was expected, what was proper. Tonight, I want to do what feels right. And this," she gestured between them, "feels more right than anything ever has." He studied her face, then slowly, reverently, began to remove the pins from her hair, letting it fall in waves around her shoulders. "Beautiful," he murmured, running his fingers through the strands. What followed was a dance as old as time, yet unique to them, a careful exploration of touches and sighs, of whispered endearments and growing passion. Eli was gentle, patient, treating her as if she were made of spun glass, but Clara, freed at last from the constraints of her past, met him with her own hunger, her own needs. They came together with a rightness that spoke of destiny, of two souls finding their match against all odds. In the golden light of sunset, then in the silver glow of moonlight, they discovered each other, mapping the territory of this new country they would inhabit together. Later, as they lay entwined in the bed they would now share, Clara traced patterns on Eli's chest, marveling at the solid reality of him. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice rumbling beneath her ear. "That I feel like I can finally breathe," she said. "Like I've been holding my breath for years and didn't even know it." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I know what you mean. I built these walls to keep the world out, but somewhere along the way, I ended up trapping myself inside them. Until you." They talked through the night, making plans for the future, expanding the garden, perhaps adding a room to the cabin, selling Clara's preserved goods in town for extra income. But they also spoke of deeper things, sharing fears and dreams they'd never voiced to another soul. As dawn broke, they finally drifted off to sleep, still wrapped around each other as if afraid to let go. The new day found them changed, no longer two isolated souls, but a united force, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The first test came sooner than expected. 3 days after the wedding, as Clara was hanging washing and Eli was repairing the chicken coop they'd decided to build, 3 riders appeared on the trail. Clara's blood ran cold as she recognized the lead rider, Samuel Morrison, the judge from Glen Hollow, not the fair-minded territorial judge who'd married them, but the harsh man who'd pronounced her exile. "Eli," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. He was beside her in an instant, his rifle appearing in his hands as if by magic. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. "And whatever happens, remember, you're my wife now. They can't touch you." The riders stopped just outside what Eli had explained was the legal boundary of his property. Samuel Morrison's face was twisted with self-righteous anger as he took in the scene. Clara in her apron, obviously at home. Eli standing protective beside her. So it's true, Morrison spat. You've taken this Jezebel into your home. Have you no shame, Dawson? The only shame here is yours, Eli replied evenly. Turning out an innocent woman based on lies and gossip. But that's done now. Clara is my wife, legal and proper. Married by Territorial Judge William Morrison, your cousin, I believe. Samuel Morrison's face purpled. You dare, I dare quite a bit when it comes to protecting what's mine. Eli cut him off. Now, you're not welcome on my land. State your business or move on. One of the other riders, a younger man Clara recognized as the sheriff's deputy from Glen Hollow, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Mr. Morrison insisted we come check on the situation. Make sure Mrs. Dawson, wasn't being held against her will. Do I look like I'm being held against my will? Clara stepped out from behind Eli, though she stayed close to his side. I'm here by choice, as this man's lawfully wedded wife. A marriage built on sin, Morrison declared. You barely waited for your husband's body to grow cold before taking up with another man. My husband has been dead for 6 months, Clara said, her voice growing stronger. I mourned him properly, even as your town cast me out to die. If Eli hadn't found me, I would have frozen to death in that storm, and you would have had my blood on your hands. Would that have satisfied your Christian justice? The deputy looked increasingly uncomfortable. She has a point, Mr. Morrison. And if they're legally married, the law of man may recognize it, but the law of God says, judge not lest ye be judged. Eli interrupted. It also says something about showing mercy and kindness to widows. You might want to revisit your Bible. Morrison's hand moved toward his sidearm, but froze as Eli shifted his rifle slightly. The message was clear. This isn't over, Morrison said through gritted teeth. That woman brought shame to our town, and now she's corrupted you too. There will be consequences. The only consequence I see, Eli said calmly, is a bitter old man who can't admit he was wrong. Now get off my land before I forget my Christian charity. The deputy tugged at Morrison's sleeve. Come on, Judge. We've done what we came to do. She's clearly here by choice, and they're legally married. We have no authority here. Morrison glared at them both for a long moment, then wheeled his horse around. You'll regret this, both of you. He called over his shoulder. God's justice may be slow, but it's sure. They watched until the riders disappeared around the bend. Then Clara sagged against Eli, trembling with delayed reaction. You were magnificent, Eli said, setting aside his rifle to hold her. Standing up to him like that. I was terrified, Clara admitted, but also angry. How dare he come here, to our home, and try to make me feel ashamed for surviving, for finding happiness? That's my girl, Eli said with fierce pride. Though I have a feeling he won't give up easily. Men like Morrison hate being proven wrong. What can he do? We're legally married. This is your land. Our land, Eli corrected. I had your name added to the deed when I was in town, and you're right. Legally, he can't touch us. But there are other ways to make trouble. We'll need to be watchful. Clara nodded, then surprised herself by smiling. You know what? I don't care. Let him try. I've already lost everything once and survived. Now I have you. I have a home. I have a life worth fighting for. He can't take that away. Eli kissed her thoroughly. Have I mentioned lately that you're the strongest woman I know? You may have said something along those lines, Clara replied, melting into his embrace. Though I think I'm only strong because you make me feel safe enough to be. They went back to their tasks, but with a new awareness. The outside world had intruded on their mountain sanctuary, bringing with it the reminder that not everyone would be happy about their unconventional union. But as Clara watched Eli work, seeing the quiet confidence in his movements, the protective way he kept glancing toward the road, she felt no fear. Whatever came, they would face it together. That night, as they lay together in their bed, Clara spoke into the darkness. Do you think he's right, Morrison, that we've sinned? Eli was quiet for a moment, then pulled her closer. I think God knows what's in our hearts. I think He knows that what we have is good and true and built on love, not lust or convenience. And I think He brought us together when we both needed saving." He paused. "But more than that, I don't think Morrison or anyone else has the right to judge what's between us. That's for us and God to sort out." Clara turned in his arms to kiss him. "I love you, Eli Dawson. And I love you, Clara Dawson, more than I ever thought possible." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and reminding them that storms could come from any direction. But inside their cabin, wrapped in each other's arms, they had created their own shelter, one built not just of logs and chinking, but of love, trust, and the unshakable belief that they were exactly where they belonged. The ring on Clara's finger caught the moonlight as she drifted off to sleep, a simple band that represented so much more than just a marriage. It was a circle of protection, a promise of partnership, and a declaration that sometimes the best revenge against those who would destroy you is simply to live well, love deeply, and refuse to let bitterness take root in your heart. Whatever Morrison and his ilk might plan, Clara and Eli would be ready. They had each other now, and that was more than either had dared hope for. In a world that had shown them both such cruelty, they had found kindness. In a life that had brought such loss, they had discovered love, and in the face of those who would judge them, they had chosen joy. The next morning, Eli saddled his horse with grim determination. "I'm going to town," he announced over breakfast. "This needs to be settled once and for all." "Eli, no," Clara protested, catching his arm. "Morrison won't listen. You'll only make things worse." "I'm not going to see Morrison," Eli said, covering her hand with his. "I'm going to see some people who might be willing to hear the truth. That deputy yesterday, did you see his face? He knows something's not right about what happened to you. You think he'd help us? Maybe not him directly, but there are good people in Glen Hollow. They've just been led astray by Morrison and his cronies. Sometimes all it takes is one person standing up to make others find their courage." Clara wanted to argue, but she saw the resolve in his eyes. This was something he needed to do, not just for her, but for them. "Be careful," she said instead, "and come back to me. Always," he promised, kissing her goodbye. The ride to Glen Hollow took most of the day. Eli arrived in late afternoon, tying his horse outside the general store. He'd chosen his first stop carefully, Richard Henderson, whose wife Martha had been among Clara's most vocal accusers. But Richard was known as a fair man, and Eli was banking on that fairness. The store was nearly empty when Eli entered. Richard looked up from his ledger, surprise flickering across his face. "Eli Dawson, haven't seen you in town for months." "Richard," Eli nodded. "I need to speak with you about Clara, my wife." Richard's expression grew uncomfortable. "I heard about the marriage. Eli, I don't want any trouble in my store." "Neither do I," Eli interrupted. "I just want you to hear the truth. Will you give me 5 minutes?" Richard glanced around the empty store, then nodded reluctantly. 5 minutes. Eli reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a worn letter. "This is from Dr. Jameson over in Riverdale. He treated Thomas Hayes in his final days when your own doctor was overwhelmed with the typhoid outbreak. Read what he says about Thomas's condition and about his debts." Richard took the letter reluctantly, but as he read, his face began to change. The doctor's words were clear. Thomas Hayes had been drinking heavily for months before his illness, had accumulated significant gambling debts, and had spoken in his delirium about making Clara pay for his failures. I didn't know," Richard said slowly. "Because Morrison didn't want you to know," Eli said. "He and Thomas's brother Jacob had business dealings together. When Thomas died owing money, they needed someone to blame. Clara was convenient, a woman alone, no family to defend her. But the merchant, she was seen buying medicine for her dying husband." Eli finished. "I've got a statement from him too, if you want to see it. He was horrified when he learned what his simple kindness had been twisted into." Richard sank onto a stool behind his counter. "Dear God, Martha was so certain." "We all were," Morrison said. Morrison says a lot of things, Eli said quietly. But how many of them are true? You've known me for years. Richard, have I ever lied to you? No, Richard admitted. You've always been straight with me. Then believe me now. Clara is a good woman who was wronged by this town. All we want is to live in peace. But Morrison seems determined to continue his persecution. I'm asking you, as a fellow Christian and a decent man, to help stop this injustice. Richard was quiet for a long moment, then looked up. What do you want me to do? Talk to your wife. Talk to others. Let them know the truth. I'm not asking anyone to do anything dramatic. Just to stop spreading lies and maybe, just maybe, to speak up the next time Morrison starts his poison. Martha won't be easy to convince. Richard warned. She's got strong opinions. Show her the letter, Eli suggested. And ask her this, if it had been her thrown out in that snowstorm, would she have wanted someone to show mercy? Richard nodded slowly. I'll try. Can't promise anything, but I'll try. Eli's next stop was the church. Reverend Phillips was preparing for evening service, and his face went pale when he saw Eli enter. Mr. Dawson, I heard about your marriage. Reverend, Eli said, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just have one question for you. The Reverend waited nervously. That night, Clara came to you for sanctuary. When the mob was throwing stones, what would Jesus have done? Phillips flinched as if slapped. The situation was complicated. Was it? Eli asked. A widow, falsely accused, seeking shelter in God's house. Seems pretty simple to me. You failed her, Reverend. Failed her and failed your calling. The question is, what are you going to do about it now? Morrison is a powerful man, Phillips said weakly. He could have me removed. And is keeping your position worth more than your soul? Eli interrupted. You know the truth now. I've made sure of that. What you do with it is between you and your God. He left the Reverend standing there, shoulders slumped with the weight of his shame. His final stop was the most important and the most dangerous. Jacob Hayes, Thomas's brother, lived in a small house at the edge of town. The man who answered the door was a shadow of his former self, thin and hollow-eyed, reeking of whiskey. You, Jacob slurred. Come to gloat. Come to give you a chance to make things right, Eli said. You know Clara was innocent? You know what your brother was really like? Jacob laughed bitterly. Innocent? Sure. And I suppose Thomas was a saint? We both know he wasn't, Eli said carefully. But Clara didn't deserve to pay for his sins. Somebody had to pay, Jacob muttered. Morrison wanted his money. Said if Clara was gone, he'd forgive the debt. What was I supposed to do? Tell the truth, Eli said simply. It's not too late, Jacob. You could still tell the truth. Jacob stared at him with bloodshot eyes. Morrison would destroy me. You're already destroyed, Eli pointed out. Look at yourself. The guilt is eating you alive. Tell the truth, and maybe you can find some peace. Jacob swayed in the doorway, and for a moment, Eli thought he might actually agree. Then his face hardened. Get out, and tell that woman. Tell her I'm sorry, but I can't. Morrison owns half this town. Cross him and you're finished. We're all finished someday, Eli said. The question is whether we can look ourselves in the mirror until then. He left Jacob standing there and headed back to his horse. He'd planted the seeds. Now he had to wait and see if any would take root. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, Clara tried to go about her daily chores, but worry gnawed at her. She was feeding the chickens when she heard horses approaching. Her heart leaped, thinking Eli had returned early, but then she saw who it was and her blood ran cold. 3 men, all wearing masks, surrounded the cabin. One carried a torch. Come out, woman, one shouted. Time to answer for your sins. Clara barricaded the door, her hands shaking as she loaded Eli's spare rifle. Get off our land, she called through the window. You have no right to be here. God's law supersedes man's law. Another rider called. You've bewitched an honest man. Led him into sin. It ends today. One of them threw the torch toward the wood pile. Clara watched in horror as it caught, flames beginning to spread toward the cabin. She had two choices: stay inside and burn, or go outside and face them. She chose to fight. Bursting through the door, she fired the rifle into the air. The horses reared, and in the confusion, she recognized one of the voices, Sam Morrison, the judge's own son. "That's enough, Sam," she shouted. "I know who you are, all of you." The men hesitated. They'd expected her to cower, not to come out fighting. "You want to burn me out? Fine," Clara continued, surprising herself with her own ferocity. "But you'll have to look me in the eye while you do it. Take off those masks and face me like men." "Don't listen to her," Sam Morrison snarled. "She's nothing but a—" His words were cut short by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Multiple horses riding hard. The masked men turned to see Eli leading a group of riders. Richard Henderson, the deputy from yesterday, and surprisingly, Reverend Phillips. "Drop your weapons," the deputy commanded. "Now!" The masked men looked at each other uncertainly. They'd expected to terrorize a woman alone, not face armed men with the law on their side. "Deputy Carson," Sam Morrison tried to bluster. This woman is defending her property from masked attackers." Deputy Carson interrupted. "And last I checked, that's her legal right. Now, you boys can unmask and face charges, or you can ride out now and never come back. Your choice." One by one, the attackers removed their masks. Besides Sam Morrison, there was his cousin Paul and one of the hired hands from the Morrison ranch. All three looked suddenly very young and foolish. "Get water on that fire," Eli ordered Richard, never lowering his gun from the three men. "Clara, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she said, though her voice shook. "They tried to burn us out." "Attempted arson," Deputy Carson noted. "That's prison time. Boys." "My father," Sam began. "Your father isn't above the law." Carson cut him off. "Though he seems to think he is." The deputy turned to Clara. "Ma'am, do you want to press charges?" Clara looked at the three young men, seeing the fear in their eyes now that their bravado had failed. Part of her wanted to see them punished, but— "I want them to leave and never come back," she said finally. "And I want them to tell everyone in Glen Hollow that Clara and Eli Dawson just want to be left in peace. Can you do that?" The three nodded quickly. "Then go," she said. "And tell Judge Morrison that his war against me ends now, or next time I won't be so merciful." The men rode off quickly, not looking back. Deputy Carson holstered his weapon. "That was well done, Mrs. Dawson. Mercy often speaks louder than justice." "How did you know to come?" Clara asked, finally allowing herself to lean against Eli, who wrapped his arm around her. "Your husband made quite an impression in town today," Carson said with a slight smile. "Got people thinking, talking. When I heard Sam Morrison gathering his friends and talking about teaching the witch a lesson, I figured I'd better ride out. Glad these others felt the same." Richard Henderson stepped forward, hat in hand. "Mrs. Dawson, Clara, I owe you an apology. We all do. My Martha read that letter, and she cried for an hour. We were wrong, and I'm sorry." Reverend Phillips cleared his throat. "I've failed in my duty as a shepherd. If you'll allow it, I'd like to make amends. Perhaps you'd consider coming to services sometime. Both of you. You'd be welcome." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. After all the rejection, these small offers of acceptance were almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she managed. "We'll think about it." After the men left, Clara and Eli stood together looking at the scorched ground where the fire had been quickly extinguished. "I'm sorry I wasn't here," Eli said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "If they'd hurt you—" "But they didn't," Clara said firmly. "And something good came of it. Deputy Carson saw the truth. Richard Henderson apologized. Even the Reverend." She shook her head in wonder. "You did this. Whatever you said in town today, it made a difference." "You did this," Eli corrected. "Standing up to them like that, choosing mercy over revenge. You're remarkable. Clara Dawson." That night, as they lay in bed holding each other, Clara felt something shift inside her. The fear that had lived in her chest for months was finally beginning to ease. They weren't completely safe. Morrison was still out there, still dangerous, but they were no longer alone. They had allies now, people willing to stand up for what was right. "Do you think it's over?" she asked quietly. Morrison's type doesn't give up easily, Eli said honestly. But his support is eroding. His own son's actions today will have people talking. The truth has a way of spreading once it gets started. I almost feel sorry for him, Clara mused. To be so consumed by hatred and the need to be right that you'd send your own son to commit a crime. Save your sympathy for those who deserve it, Eli advised. Morrison made his choices. Now he has to live with the consequences. Clara nodded, then turned in his arms to kiss him. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for fighting for me, for us." "Always," he replied. "You're my wife, Clara. Your battles are my battles. Your victories are mine. That's what marriage means." As they drifted off to sleep, Clara reflected on the day's events. She'd faced down her attackers, seen the beginning of justice, and gained unexpected allies. More than that, she'd discovered a strength in herself she hadn't known existed. The frightened widow who'd been driven from Glen Hollow in the snow was gone. In her place stood Clara Dawson, wife, fighter, and survivor. Whatever came next, she was ready for it. She had Eli beside her, a rifle she knew how to use, and the knowledge that sometimes the best response to hatred wasn't more hatred, but the quiet insistence on living well despite those who would see you destroyed. Morrison and his ilk had tried to break her, but instead, they'd forged her into something stronger, and that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. The spring morning dawned bright and clear as Clara and Eli made their way down the mountain path toward Glen Hollow. It was the first time Clara had returned to the town since her exile, and her hands trembled slightly on the wagon reins. Eli rode alongside on horseback, his presence a steady comfort. "We don't have to do this," he said for the third time that morning. "We've got everything we need up at the cabin." "No," Clara said firmly. "I won't hide any more. We need supplies, and I have every right to walk those streets with my head held high." As they entered the outskirts of town, Clara noticed curtains twitching in windows, faces peering out to watch their passage. But something had changed. Where once there had been only hostility, now she saw curiosity, even a few tentative nods of greeting, at Henderson's general store. Richard himself came out to help them with their wagon. "Mrs. Dawson. Mr. Dawson. Good to see you both." Inside, Martha Henderson stood behind the counter, her face flushed with embarrassment. She opened her mouth several times before finally managing, "Clara? I mean, Mrs. Dawson, I owe you an apology." Clara felt Eli tense beside her, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "What's past is past, Martha. We all do things we regret when fear takes hold." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "I was so wrong. When Richard showed me that letter, when I realized what we'd done..." She came around the counter and, to Clara's surprise, embraced her. "Can you forgive me?" "Already done," Clara said softly, returning the embrace. As they continued their shopping, other townspeople began to approach. Some offered quiet apologies. Others simply treated them with the normal courtesy due any married couple. It wasn't universal. Clara caught plenty of cold stares and turned backs, but it was progress. They were loading their purchases when a commotion erupted down the street. Judge Samuel Morrison stood on the courthouse steps, his son Sam beside him with a blackened eye. "Citizens of Glen Hollow," Morrison bellowed, "I have been betrayed by my own flesh and blood. My son, in whom I placed such trust, has confessed to attempted arson against the Dawson property." The gathered crowd murmured in shock. Clara and Eli exchanged glances. This wasn't what they'd expected. "I cast him out," Morrison continued, his voice rising to near hysteria, "as we cast out all sinners who would corrupt our righteous community. Let his fate be a warning to any who would defy God's law." Sam Morrison stood silent beside his father, his face a mask of misery. Then, suddenly, he spoke up. "I'm not the only sinner here. Father, tell them about Thomas Hayes's debts. Tell them about your deal with Jacob Hayes." Morrison's face went purple. "Silence, boy." "No," Sam shouted. "I won't be silent anymore. You made me believe Mrs. Dawson was evil, but she showed me mercy when she had every right to see me jailed. That's more Christian than anything you've ever done." The crowd was fully engaged now, pressing closer to hear. Deputy Carson appeared at the edge of the gathering, watching carefully. "You want to know the truth?" Sam continued, turning to address the townspeople. "My father and Jacob Hayes conspired to blame Clara Hayes for her husband's debts. They drove her out so they could seize her property and settle Thomas's accounts. Everything else, the rumors, the accusations, it was all lies to cover their greed." The crowd erupted in shocked exclamations. Morrison tried to speak, but his voice was drowned out by the angry voices of people realizing they'd been manipulated. "Is this true, Morrison?" someone shouted. "You had to stone an innocent woman," another voice called out. Deputy Carson stepped forward. "Judge Morrison, I think you'd better come with me. There are some questions that need answering." Morrison looked around wildly. Seeing his support crumbling, his eyes landed on Clara, standing tall beside her husband, and his face twisted with rage. "This is your doing, woman. You've corrupted my son, turned this town against me." "No, sir," Clara said, her voice carrying clearly across the square. "You did that yourself. I just survived long enough for the truth to come out." As Carson led Morrison away, Sam approached Clara and Eli. The young man looked haggard, older than his years. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. "What I did was unforgivable, but I want you to know I'm sorry, and I'll do whatever I can to make amends." Clara studied him for a long moment. "You stood up to your father. That took courage. As for forgiveness," she glanced at Eli, who nodded slightly. "Come see us in a month. We're building a new chicken coop and could use an extra pair of hands. Hard work is good for the soul." Sam's eyes widened in surprise. "You'd trust me, after what I did?" "Everyone deserves a second chance," Eli said. "Question is whether you'll take it or waste it." "I'll take it, sir. I swear I will." As they prepared to leave town, Reverend Phillips approached. "Mrs. Dawson. Mr. Dawson. After what we've witnessed today, I feel I must make a public apology. This Sunday's sermon will be on the dangers of false judgment and the importance of mercy. Would you consider attending? I believe the congregation needs to see you there, to truly understand the wrong that was done." Clara looked at Eli, who shrugged. "Your choice," he said simply. "We'll think about it, Reverend." Clara said, "But thank you for the invitation." The ride home was quiet, both of them processing the dramatic turn of events. As they reached their valley, Clara finally spoke. "I never expected that," Sam Morrison turning against his father. "Conscience is a powerful thing," Eli observed. "Sometimes it just takes one act of mercy to awaken it." That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Clara felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a kind of sadness for all the pain that could have been avoided if people had just sought the truth from the beginning. "Regrets?" Eli asked, reading her mood as he so often did. "No," Clara said slowly. "If none of it had happened, I wouldn't be here with you. I can't regret that, but I do feel sorry for Sam Morrison. Imagine having to choose between your father and your conscience." "He made the right choice," Eli said. "Not the easy one, but the right one." 3 days later, they received an unexpected visitor. Jacob Hayes rode up to their cabin, looking even more haggard than when Eli had seen him in town. He dismounted slowly, as if every movement hurt. Eli stepped out with his rifle, though he didn't point it. "Jacob, state your business." "I've come to make things right," Jacob said, his voice rough. "I heard what happened in town." "What Sam said, boy's got more courage than I ever did." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather portfolio. "These are Thomas's papers. His real debts, his real problems. Shows Morrison was part of it from the start, encouraging Thomas to gamble, lending him money at interest that would make a saint swear. Clara had joined them on the porch. Jacob couldn't meet her eyes as he continued. There's also a signed statement from me, telling the whole truth. How Morrison pressured me. How we conspired to blame you. Clara, I'm heading to the territorial capital tomorrow to file it with the authorities. Morrison may own Glen Hollow, but he doesn't own Wyoming. Why now? Clara asked quietly. Why come forward now? Jacob finally looked at her, and she saw tears in his bloodshot eyes. Because I can't sleep, can't eat, can't look at myself in the mirror. Thomas was my brother, but he was a weak man who made bad choices. You didn't deserve to pay for those choices. He swallowed hard. I don't expect forgiveness. I needed you to know I'm trying to make it right. What will you do after you file the papers? Eli asked. Leave. Start over somewhere. Try to be a better man than I've been. Jacob mounted his horse again. I'm sorry, Clara, for everything. You were a good wife to my brother, better than he deserved. I hope you found happiness. I have, Clara said simply. And Jacob, I hope you find peace. He nodded once, then rode away. They never saw him again, though they later heard he'd kept his word about filing the documents. That Sunday, Clara and Eli did attend church. The congregation fell silent as they entered, but then Martha Henderson stood up and began to clap. Richard joined her, then the deputy, then others, until half the church was applauding while the other half sat in uncomfortable silence. Reverend Phillips delivered a powerful sermon on the woman caught in adultery, and how Jesus had challenged those without sin to cast the first stone. His eyes found Clara often during the message, and by the end, there weren't many dry eyes in the church. After the service, a small crowd gathered around Clara and Eli. Some offered apologies, others simply welcomed them. Not everyone. There were still those who clung to their prejudices, but enough to show that the tide had truly turned. As they rode home, Clara reflected on the strange twists life could take. 6 months ago, she'd been driven from this town in shame and fear. Today, she'd returned with her head high and her husband beside her, to find at least some measure of justice and acceptance. You know what the best part is? She said to Eli as their cabin came into view. What's that? We don't need their acceptance anymore. It's nice to have it. Nice to see justice done. But even if none of this had happened, we'd still have each other. We'd still have our life here. That's what matters. Eli reached over to squeeze her hand. Wisest words I've heard all day. Mrs. Dawson. That night, as spring rain pattered gently on their roof, Clara lay in Eli's arms, feeling truly at peace for the first time since Thomas's death. The past couldn't be changed, but it no longer had power over her. Morrison would face justice for his schemes. Already word was that the territorial authorities were very interested in Jacob's documents. Sam Morrison would come to work on their homestead, beginning his own journey of redemption. And the town that had once cast her out was slowly learning the cost of rushed judgment and the value of mercy. I love you, she whispered to Eli in the darkness. Love you too, he murmured back. Always will. Clara smiled, pressing closer to his warmth. Always. Such a simple word, but from Eli, it was a promise she could build a life on. And that's exactly what she intended to do. The rain continued, washing the world clean, watering the garden they'd planted together, nourishing the soil that would bring forth new life. Just as the cruelty of others had ultimately led her to Eli, now the seeds of justice were finally flowering. It had been a long, hard winter, but spring had come at last, not just to the mountain, but to her heart. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. She knew there would always be those who judged, who condemned, who couldn't see past their own prejudices. But tonight, safe in the arms of the man who'd saved her in every way a person could be saved, Clara Dawson was simply grateful for second chances, for mercy, for love that could bloom even in the rockiest ground, and for the knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, truth and justice could prevail. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility. And Clara intended to meet it with open arms, a courageous heart, and the unshakable faith that with Eli beside her, she could weather any storm. The summer heat shimmered across the valley as Clara stood in the doorway of their cabin, one hand resting on her growing belly. The discovery of her pregnancy had come as a surprise 3 months after their wedding, filling both her and Eli with a mixture of joy and trepidation. "You should be resting," Eli said, coming up behind her with a glass of cool water from the spring. "I've been resting all morning," Clara protested, though she accepted the water gratefully. "I wanted to watch you and Sam working on the barn." Down in the meadow, Sam Morrison labored alongside Eli, hauling lumber for the new barn they were building. The young man had proven true to his word, arriving every week to help with whatever tasks needed doing. The work had been good for him. He'd lost the soft look of privilege and gained the lean strength of someone who'd learned the value of honest labor. "Boys coming along?" Eli observed. "Asked yesterday if he could bring his sister next time. Says she wants to learn gardening from you." Clara smiled. Poor girl, with her father awaiting trial and her mother retreating to relatives back east. She must be lonely. "Kind of you to consider it, given everything. Children shouldn't pay for their parents' sins," Clara said firmly. "Besides, I could use the help with the garden. This little one seems determined to sap all my energy." Eli placed his hand over hers on her belly, his face soft with wonder. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the life they'd built continue to flourish. A rider appeared on the trail, Deputy Carson, who'd become a regular visitor. He dismounted with a grin, pulling off his hat to wipe his brow. "Afternoon, folks." "Hot enough for you?" "What brings you by deputy?" Eli asked, though his tone was friendly. Carson had more than proven himself a friend. "Good news. Actually, thought you'd want to hear it straight away." Carson accepted a dipper of water from Clara before continuing. "Judge Morrison's been found guilty. Fraud, conspiracy, corruption. The territorial court threw the book at him. He'll be spending the next 10 years breaking rocks." Clara felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a touch of sadness for the waste of it all. What about Jacob Hayes? His testimony helped seal Morrison's fate. Last I heard, he was heading to California to start over. The judge was lenient, given his cooperation. "And the town?" Eli asked. Carson grinned. "That's the other news. They've appointed a new judge, Judge Whitman from Cheyenne. Good man. Fair. And the town council voted to offer you both a formal apology and an invitation to return if you ever wanted." Clara and Eli exchanged glances. "That's kind of them," Clara said carefully. "But our life is here now." "Figured you'd say that." Carson nodded. "Can't say I blame you. You've built something good here." He glanced at Clara's obvious condition and smiled wider. "And looking to build more. I see. Congratulations." After Carson left, Clara and Eli sat on the porch in the evening cool. Sam had headed home, promising to bring his sister Sarah the following week. "Any regrets about not moving back to town?" Eli asked. "None," Clara said without hesitation. "That life feels like it belonged to someone else. I'm Clara Dawson now, not Clara Hayes. My home is here, with you, even though it means hard winters and isolation." Clara laughed. "After last winter, I think we've proven we can handle whatever the mountain throws at us. Besides," she patted her belly, "we won't be isolated much longer." The following week, Sam arrived with his sister Sarah, a quiet girl of 17 who reminded Clara painfully of herself at that age, trying to be strong in the face of family disgrace. Clara took her under her wing immediately, teaching her about herbs and vegetables, sharing the wisdom her own mother had passed down. "Mrs. Dawson," Sarah said one day as they worked side by side in the garden. "How do you do it? How do you forgive what was done to you?" Clara considered the question carefully. "Forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was acceptable. It's about choosing not to let bitterness poison your own heart. Your father wronged me terribly, but if I held on to that anger, it would only hurt me and my family. I choose joy instead." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Sam says you and Mr. Dawson saved him, gave him a chance when no one else would. Everyone deserves a second chance. Clara said, your brother is proving himself worthy of his... As summer turned to autumn, Clara's condition advanced. The local midwife, a tough old woman named Agnes Brown, made regular visits to check on her. Strong as an ox, this one, Agnes declared after one examination. Baby's positioned well. Should be an easy birth, as these things go. Easy for you to say, Clara muttered, making Eli laugh nervously. The approaching birth terrified and excited him in equal measure. One evening, as they prepared for bed, Clara watched Eli add another log to the fire. The cabin had been expanded over the summer, a new room for the baby, a larger kitchen, proper glass windows to replace the oiled paper. It was becoming a real home, not just a shelter. Eli, she said softly, are you happy? He turned to her with surprise. Happy? Clara, I'm more than happy. He struggled for words. For 8 years, I existed. I survived. I went through the motions of living but felt nothing. Then you came along and brought me back to life. Now we're about to have a child, something I never dreamed possible. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Hormones, she said, waving off his concern. I cry at everything these days. Last week I cried because the sunset was too beautiful. Eli came to sit beside her on the bed, pulling her into his arms. Cry all you want. Happy tears are always welcome in this house. The first snow came early that year, dusting the mountains while the valley still wore autumn colors. Clara stood at the window, watching the gentle fall. When the first pain hit, she gasped, gripping the windowsill. Eli, he was beside her instantly. Is it time? I think so. Another pain rolled through her. You'd better send Sam for Agnes. What followed were the longest hours of Eli's life. Agnes arrived quickly, taking charge with the efficiency of long experience. Sarah came too, eager to help and learn. Eli was banished to the main room where Sam tried to distract him with conversation. You're wearing a groove in the floor, Sam observed as Eli paced for the 100th time. Is it always like this? Eli demanded. The waiting. My mother had 6 children. Sam said, my father wore out 3 floors, according to her. A cry from the bedroom sent Eli to the door, but Sarah emerged with a smile. Not yet, but soon. Clara's doing wonderfully. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the snow-capped peaks rose and gold. A new cry filled the cabin, the indignant wail of a newborn making his presence known. Eli, Agnes called, come meet your son. Eli entered the bedroom on unsteady legs to find Clara propped up in bed, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a wrapped bundle. The baby was perfect, a shock of dark hair like his father, his mother's delicate features, and a pair of lungs that promised he'd never be overlooked. A son, Eli breathed, sinking onto the bed beside them. Our son. Samuel, Clara said. I'd like to call him Samuel, if you don't mind. It means God has heard. Samuel Dawson, Eli agreed, touching the baby's tiny fist with one finger. The infant gripped it with surprising strength. Strong already, like his father. Clara murmured, leaning against Eli's shoulder. Later, as mother and baby slept, Eli stepped out onto the porch where Sam and Sarah waited. His name is Samuel, he told them. Clara wanted him named after someone who chose courage over comfort. Sam's eyes widened, then filled with tears. I don't deserve... None of us deserve grace, Eli said firmly. That's what makes it grace. As news of the birth spread, visitors began arriving. The Hendersons brought food and baby clothes. Deputy Carson brought a hand-carved rattle. Even Reverend Phillips made the journey, offering a blessing for the new family. It's like the whole valley is celebrating, Clara marveled, nursing little Samuel while Eli fielded visitors. They're celebrating new life, Agnes said wisely, and the triumph of love over hardship. People need stories like yours, especially in hard times. Reminds them that good can come from bad, that second chances are possible. That evening, As the cabin finally quieted, Clara and Eli sat together watching their son sleep in the cradle Eli had crafted with his own hands. The fire crackled peacefully, and outside the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white. "We've come so far," Clara whispered. "A year ago, I was dying in a snowstorm. Now you're living the life you were meant to have." Eli finished. "We both are." Samuel stirred, making soft baby sounds, and they both smiled. This tiny person was the culmination of their journey, proof that love could bloom in the harshest ground, that broken people could build something whole together. "I love you," Clara said, as she had so many times before. But now the words carried the weight of all they'd overcome, all they'd built, all they would face together in the years to come. "And I love you," Eli replied, pulling her close. "Both of you. Forever and always." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the paths that had brought them together, hiding the scars of old wounds. But inside the cabin, warmed by fire and love, the Dawson family began their newest chapter. They had weathered exile and injustice, faced down prejudice and persecution, and emerged stronger for it. Now, with their son in their arms and their future bright before them, they had everything they needed. The mountains stood eternal guard around their valley, protecting this family that had earned its happiness through courage, forgiveness, and the unshakable belief that love was always worth fighting for. And in the years to come, when Samuel asked about how his parents met, they would tell him the truth, that sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings, and that two broken hearts, when joined together, can create something beautiful and whole. Thank you all for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and let me know your thoughts on Clara and Eli's journey. Did their story touch your heart as it did mine? Share your feelings, and I'll see you in the next tale from the American frontier.